Long before Smaug descended upon Erebor, long before his wings darkened the skies of the north, there were dragons, and their fire was woven into the very fabric of Middle-earth's long sorrows. They did not begin as wanderers or as thieves, but as deliberate acts of rebellion, shaped in the furnaces of Morgoth's thought when the world was still young. To understand Smaug's place, one must return to the first fires, when creation and unmaking clashed in terrible balance, for the Valar had sung the world into being, its mountains and rivers bound by harmony. But Morgoth, master of discord, sought to break what was sung. He birthed the first of the fire drakes, Glaurung, who crawled across Beleriand and proved that flame could be turned against stone, will against covenant, and fear against hope. From him others arose, wingless at first, but later with pinions vast enough to shroud armies in shadow. The most terrible of them was Ancalagon the Black, whose fall broke the towers of Thangorodrim and marked the end of the First Age. Yet such endings were not true endings. Dragons, like the memory of fire, lingered. In the deep places of the world they smoldered, diminished yet unquenched, waiting for an age in which to rise again. Smaug was one of these embers, born of that ancient line, carrying in his veins the echo of Morgoth's design, yet entering history at a time when the world had forgotten what it was to tremble beneath dragon wing. The centuries between Ancalagon's fall and Smaug's flight were filled with the rise and fading of kingdoms. Men multiplied, elves diminished, and the dwarves deepened their delvings. In those long spans, dragon fire seemed a memory, something folded into song and tale, a terror consigned to distant ages. Yet this forgetting was itself dangerous, for it left realms unguarded against repetition. It was into this atmosphere of weary prosperity that Smaug came, sudden and unheralded, as though summoned not by chance but by fate's deliberate hand. What was Smaug's origin? The chronicles do not say. Some claim he was born in the cold northern wastes, in the furrowed waith where bitter winds scour the land and few endure. Others whisper that he descended from some hidden clutch of Ancalagon's brood, a remnant spared from the cataclysm that unmade the north. The truth is shrouded, and perhaps it must remain so, for mystery itself gave him power. What is certain is that his coming was not merely the wandering of a beast, but the unfolding of a consequence, the last echo of a rebellion older than men's lineages. In Smaug's youth, before he turned toward Erebor, he tested his wings upon lesser folk. Villages vanished, caravans burned, and the memory of terror returned to those who thought the age of dragons had ended. His name sped like a rumor across mountains and rivers, always moving faster than the truth, until he became less a creature than a legend that walked. And then, when the north was whispering his approach, he turned his gaze upon the lonely mountain. It is here that Smaug's singularity becomes clear. He was not vast as Ancalagon, nor the first like Glaurung, yet he bore something sharper, cunning refined by solitude. He had watched the world's movements from shadow and chosen his hour with precision. Erebor, radiant with gold and the Arkenstone's glow, stood not only as a hoard but as a symbol of dwarven pride. Dale flourished nearby, its markets humming with trade, its people confident beneath the mountain's protection. This union of wealth, pride, and stability was irresistible to a dragon born of hunger and design. To strike at Erebor was to wound more than stone. It was to wound a people's memory and a region's balance. Dragons seek not only gold, but the unmaking of order. Smaug, true to this, did not descend randomly, but with terrible intention. His fire was not only to consume, but to hollow. He came not merely to take, but to transform, to turn a living kingdom into a silent throne for himself alone. And in doing so, he carried forward the old pattern. Morgoth's legacy renewed in one last Drake, one last sovereign of ash. Yet before that descent, there is a silence worth noting. The chronicles of men and elves alike reveal a curious gap, a moment when Smaug lingered, as if waiting. Was he measuring his prey, or savoring the fear that rumors had sown? Did he see himself as heir to Ainulindalë, destined to remind the world that fire still answers greed? These questions remain unanswered, but they speak to a truth deeper than mere appetite. Smaug was not mindless. His choices bore calculation, and in them lay the terror of his kind. The world at large, however, did not yet know. Far to the south, Gondor watched the shifting shadows of Mordor. In Lindon, the elves mourned their fading. Few gave thought to the lonely mountain, distant and prosperous in its northern isolation. This neglect was part of what drew Smaug, for isolation is fertile ground for invasion. Thus, when he finally moved, it was sudden, devastating, and irreversible. The memory of those earlier dragons prepared few for what was to come. Larung's deceit, Ainulindalë's ruin, all these seemed ancient history, as though locked behind the walls of myth. Yet history in Middle-earth is never closed, its fires rekindle when least expected. Smaug's wings were that rekindling, his fire the memory of a rebellion older than stonework. When he came, he reminded all that the world is never beyond shadow, that pride invites flame and that hoarded light draws darkness. Here the world shifts. Smaug has not yet descended upon Erebor, but already his presence reshapes the narrative. For even before his fire touched the mountain, he altered the destiny of Durin's line, of Dale's merchants, of Lake Town's fishermen, and of the wider world that would later reckon with his ruin. He was not yet enthroned in Erebor, but his shadow had already begun to stretch across maps and memories. Therefore, when we speak of Smaug, we do not speak only of a dragon's hunger, but of a last echo of the ancient discord between order and entropy. He was at once a beast and a principle, both hunger and history embodied. And though he had not yet claimed his treasure, the inevitability of his flight toward the mountain was already written, a thread carried forward from Morgoth's first act of defiance. The stage is set, Erebor gleaming, Dale alive, the north at ease, and in the cold winds of rumor, a fire is stirring. Smaug circles unseen, his shadow gathering. The question now is not if he will strike, but how the world will endure when he does. And so we turn, with a quiet inevitability, toward the lonely mountain, to see the splendor that would soon be tested by flame. In the north there rose a mountain that stood apart, solitary and immense, its peak crowned with snow and its roots buried in stone. Older than memory, the dwarves called it Erebor, the lonely mountain, and from its deep heart they carved out halls that glittered with treasures wrought by hands unmatched in craft. It was no mere dwelling, but a kingdom enclosed, an echo of Khazad-dûm's ancient glory and a beacon of wealth in a land otherwise stern and rugged. In those days, before fire darkened its gates, Erebor was alive with music of hammers, the ring of anvils, and the slow thunder of dwarves shaping the hidden veins of the earth into forms of marvel. Within the halls lay treasures beyond gold. The dwarves of Durin's line, descended from noble Thrain and Thror, drew from the deep caverns stones that glowed like stars, gems that caught the light of lanterns, and seemed to store dawn within them. Their greatest jewel was the Arkenstone, a relic not made by mortal hand but discovered, crystalline and radiant at the mountain's heart. It became their symbol and their pride, a stone around which songs were sung and loyalties pledged. To see it was to glimpse something unearthly, a fragment of light hidden in dark places. Its presence made the halls of Erebor more than a seat of kings. It made them a sanctuary of wonder. Around the mountain prospered Dale, a city of men built at its feet, whose markets thrived upon the dwarves' abundance. Merchants came from distant lands, their ships drawing up along the river running, bringing silks, wines, and rare woods, and departing with armorings, mail, and finely wrought blades. The air of Dale was filled with the smells of spice, smoke, and baked bread, with the laughter of children who played beneath banners of bright color. Men and dwarves lived in kinship, bound not by blood but by covenant of trade and trust, each flourishing by the strength of the other. It was a harmony rare in Middle-earth, where suspicion often lay between races, yet here the prosperity of one became the fortune of all. The mountain itself was more than stone and metal. Its caverns were shaped into grand architecture, pillared halls whose ceilings vanished into shadow, chambers lit by reflected fire upon walls of polished stone, and stairways broad enough for armies. The sound of water echoed in subterranean rivers that wound through the depths, feeding forges and turning wheels. To walk within Erebor in those days was to feel the weight of centuries resting in craftsmanship, to see the dignity of a people who believed stone could be shaped into permanence. The mountain was not only a dwelling but a living testament to the dwarves' will to endure. Yet pride lived alongside beauty, and pride, though quiet, is seldom unseen. The dwarves had prospered beyond measure, their coffers filled to spilling. Gold lay in heaps, chalices upon chalices, crowns forgotten beneath piles of coins, and treasures so numerous that memory could no longer keep count. Their songs turned increasingly toward what they had gathered, and their hearts to what they guarded. Though they did not yet know it, this hoard was more than wealth, it was a beacon. Gold calls to dragonkind as surely as blood calls to wolves, and the greater the hoard, the sharper the call. In the splendor of their halls, the dwarves had kindled a flame visible to eyes that watched from far beyond their borders. Still, in those days of abundance, few could imagine peril. Thra, king under the mountain, sat upon his throne with the Arkenstone above him, a light that gave authority to his reign. Dale's men honored their allies. Trade passed along the river untroubled, and even distant realms looked with envy but not yet malice upon the lonely mountain. Travelers spoke of Erebor as a marvel of the age, a place where craftsmanship had reached its height and peace had taken root in stone. It was a bright interval, a fragile season when Middle-earth seemed to breathe freely, unshadowed by the looming threats that stirred in other corners of the world. But harmony is never eternal. Beneath every shining surface lies the shadow of cost, and wealth carries weight. The dwarves grew possessive, guarding their treasures more fiercely as the hoard increased. Dale's merchants, though prosperous, sensed the growing distance of their allies. A faint edge of suspicion entered their dealings, and the gold that once bound them began to weigh upon the bond. It was not yet division, but the seed of it had been planted. Pride, isolation, and the allure of gold are strands easily knotted into ruin, though few recognized the knot tightening around them. Beyond their knowing, eyes already watched. In the cold airs of the north, whispers of Erebor's wealth carried. Tales of the Arkenstone drifted further than Dale's markets, carried on the breath of traders and travelers. And in those tales lay an unintentional summons. For in forgotten places, hunger stirs at the scent of gold, and wings stretch at the promise of unguarded light. Erebor, shining at the height of its splendor, had made itself irresistible, though none within its walls believed the danger real. Even the songs of the dwarves hinted at fate, for they sang of their treasure in words that echoed far beyond the mountain. Words, once sung, cannot be contained. They travel like sparks on wind, and somewhere in the unseen distance, a spark found tinder. It would not be long before the mountain's songs, proud and unguarded, would awaken a listener who lived for fire and for gold. For now, however, the mountain stood in majesty. Its forges glowed red, Its halls rang with craft, and its people moved with confidence through chambers vast as cathedrals. Children of Dale looked up at the snow-capped peak and saw a symbol of safety, a guardian against the wild. Merchants departed with coffers full, speaking in wonder of the riches hidden beneath stone. Travelers carried stories of a kingdom where prosperity seemed endless. All appeared secure, as though this mountain were a world unto itself, untouched by shadow. But mountains cannot shield against what flies. Gold cannot be hidden from what hungers for it. In their splendor, the dwarves of Erebor had unknowingly lit a beacon across the wilderness, brighter than fire, louder than song, and in the far distance, unseen yet already moving, something vast turned its gaze toward them. Smaug, still a whisper upon the wind, had felt the pull. The harmony of Erebor would endure only until his wings crossed the sky, and the splendor of the mountain would soon become the lure of its doom. Thus the stage narrows. A kingdom stands radiant, a city thrives in its shadow, and the world forgets what it means to cower beneath fire. Yet the silence of the north is breaking, and soon the sound of wings will echo, where laughter now reigns. What was built in centuries can be unmade in hours, and Erebor's shining halls were already trembling with a fate none yet foresaw. It began as a whisper of shadow upon the horizon, a tremor in the sky that few noticed at first, for the north had long been quiet. Yet silence can hide its own dangers, and in that stillness a power stirred that no wall nor covenant could withstand. Smaug was coming. From what lair he rose, no chronicler could say with certainty. Some claimed the frozen desolation of the Forodwaith bore him, hardened by bitter winds. Others believed he emerged from a forgotten brood hidden deep in crags, where no man dared tread. What all agreed upon was this: when he unfurled his wings, the age of peace in Erebor had ended, though those within the mountain had not yet heard the sound of his approach. Smaug moved like a storm gathering its strength. Villages along the northern highlands vanished in sudden conflagrations, their ashes scattered upon the wind. Travelers spoke of a shadow crossing the sun, followed by fire that fell without warning. Herds fled from pastures, rivers ran dark with soot, and already the world began to remember what it had chosen to forget, that dragons were not gone. News ran ahead of him, distorted and fearful. Men whispered of a beast vast as a mountain, of eyes like twin suns, of a voice that echoed like thunder. Rumor, as always, outraced truth, but truth followed closely behind, borne on wings that spanned the breadth of valleys. When Smaug turned his gaze southward, the lonely mountain stood gleaming in his sight like a jewel left upon a pedestal. Its walls of stone, its halls filled with the gold of Doran's line, its vaults crowned with the Arkenstone's light, all of it called to him with a force no dragon could resist. For dragons are bound by two hungers, one of fire to consume, and one of treasure to possess. To Smaug, Erebor was both a feast and a throne, and he came not as a wanderer but as a conqueror, whose dominion would be sealed by flame. The day of his coming was one remembered in dread by survivors who fled into the wild. The skies darkened as his shadow fell, and with a single roar the air trembled. His wings beat down upon the earth like storms crashing upon mountains, and his fire poured forth in torrents that no water could quench. The gates of Erebor, carved and mighty, stood for only moments before the mountain itself seemed to blaze. Dwarves within were caught in chaos, their halls that had once echoed with song now filled with smoke and cries. The Arkenstone shone in defiance as though its light could resist. But against Smaug's fury even such a gem was powerless. The men of Dale saw fire crown the mountain, and their city became the next target of wrath. Houses of timber and stone were consumed, their markets silenced, their laughter extinguished. Those who survived fled in boats across the river running, carrying little more than the memory of flame reflected in water. Smaug's descent was not simply conquest, it was devastation that left no corner untouched, a reminder that dragons did not merely take wealth but unmade the order that wealth had built. In the halls of Erebor, Thror and his kin fought to rally their people, but their axes and shields clattered uselessly against the sheer scale of the foe. Smaug's body filled the cavernous chambers, his fire curled along the walls, and his laughter, cruel and knowing, echoed through pillars that had once stood in pride. One by one, the dwarves abandoned their treasures, their oaths, and even their king, fleeing into exile with nothing but grief. Behind them the mountain roared as Smaug claimed it, his vast form coiling atop the gold that became his bed, his breath turning the very air to heat and ash. Thus began the reign of silence. For Smaug was no ruler in the manner of kings. He built no alliances, called no council, forged no treaties. His law was absence, his dominion fear, his throne the destruction of what once had been. Erebor's grand halls, crafted for song, now rang only with the restless shifting of scales upon coins. The treasure of Durin's folk, once a testament to craft and endurance, became the symbol of loss, bound beneath the weight of Smaug's presence. For Dale, the aftermath was ruin. Its people scattered, clinging to survival in Lake Town. Their prosperity turned into subsistence. They looked up at the mountain, now crowned by dread, and saw not a neighbor, but a predator watching. Even the bravest among them did not dare tread close, for Smaug's eyes pierced the distance, and his wings could cross the span of leagues in moments. Life bent itself around the dragon's presence, reshaping trade, culture, and the very rhythm of the region. Fear had become geography, and hope a faint memory. Far away, in halls of elves, and in cities of men, news spread of the fall of Erebor, and with it came unease. Some mourned, others envied, but all understood that a power had returned which could not be ignored. Dragons were no longer myth. They were present, and their presence meant instability. Yet none dared to challenge Smaug directly, for who would seek to rouse the fire in his mountain? Thus he remained unopposed, secure in his dominion, his slumber stretched across decades, his dreams warmed by gold and by memory of conquest. It was in this silence that the world adjusted, bending itself to the weight of one dragon enthroned upon a mountain of treasure. The dwarves of Durin's line wandered homeless, their legacy smoldering behind them. The men of Lake Town endured beneath the shadow, their survival tempered by hardship, and across Middle-earth, the memory of Dragonfire returned to song and tale, this time not as legend but as warning. Smaug had remade the world without ever leaving his lair, his very existence altering the balance of kingdom. Yet fire cannot rest forever. Even in his slumber, Smaug's hunger remained. His cunning never dulled. His hoard grew not in treasure but in weight upon the world. For the more it remained under his dominion, the more it called to others who dreamed of reclaiming it. Rumors of gold are themselves a kind of fire, spreading unseen, igniting desires in places distant. Smaug, coiled in his dark majesty, might have believed himself secure, but in truth the seeds of his downfall had already been sown in the exiles, in the dispossessed, and in the whispers of wealth waiting to be claimed. Thus the age of peace in Erebor ended, and in its place began an age defined by absence and fear. Where once the mountain had been a beacon, it now stood as a wound upon the north. And though the dragon slept, the world beyond his gates shifted, waiting as though destiny itself were holding its breath. The story, once thought concluded in fire, was only beginning, for the shadow of Smaug was not only his own, but the reflection of all who would come to reckon with him. And so the silence deepened, not as an end, but as a pause before the next movement of fate. When the fires had quieted and the screams had faded into silence, a new order took root in the lonely mountain. Though it was not the order of kingship or covenant, Smaug had claimed Erebor, and with his claiming came a rule unlike any throne before it. For dragons do not govern as men or dwarves govern. They summon no council, pass no laws, issue no decrees. Their dominion is of fear, and their throne is of absence. Smaug ruled by being present and by leaving nothing else alive within his shadow. Where once songs had echoed through vast chambers, only the scraping of claws on stone and the shifting of coins remained. The mountain breathed with him, its air hot with his exhalations, its walls trembling when his body stirred among his horde. The dwarves had fled, their treasures abandoned. The men of Dale had scattered, their city in ruin. What remained within Erebor was gold, and gold alone. Yet even gold is transformed under a dragon's dominion. It ceased to be wealth in the sense of commerce or craft, and became a kind of curse, a thing bound to fire and malice. Smaug lay upon it, shaping it to his form, coins pressed into scales, gems scattering their light across the expanse of his belly. To any who might dare to see him, he appeared as part of the treasure itself, an immense shape glittering with stolen light, indistinguishable from the hoard, until his eyes opened. In this way his rule was complete. The treasure was not merely possessed, it was consumed into his very being. What does it mean for a kingdom to fall into such a silence? For Erebor, it meant erasure. Thrones stood empty, forges grew cold, and the songs of Durin's folk ceased to be heard in their ancestral halls. The Arkenstone, once lifted high as a sign of covenant, became a mere ornament in Smaug's keeping, its radiance unappreciated by the cruel eyes that watched over it. The mountain itself seemed altered. Though stone endures, the air grew heavy, and the echo of hammers was replaced with a suffocating quiet. It was as though the mountain mourned, its heart still glowing with secret fires, yet covered by ash. Beyond the mountain, the world adjusted to this silence. The men who had survived Dale drifted to Lake Town, clinging to the waters as protection against fire. They lived in a constant state of unease, their lives ordered not by their own desires, but by the fear of waking Smaug's wrath. To speak of Erebor was dangerous, even in whispers, for the dragon's presence weighed on every word. The dwarves wandered far, carrying grief like a burden none could set down. Their lineage was intact, but their home was gone, and with it a part of their soul. Thus Smaug ruled, not through armies or emissaries, but through absence itself. What was it like for him, coiled upon that hoard day after day, year upon year? Dragons are not beasts without thought. Their minds are sharp, their cunning subtle, and their pride endless. Smaug delighted in his dominion, not by ruling but by denying rule to any other. He relished the fear his name evoked, the knowledge that beyond his gates the world bent itself around him. His solitude was not loneliness but sovereignty, a state in which every coin beneath him sang of his triumph. He spoke to no one, yet his silence became the loudest voice in the north. Still, even in such apparent stillness there is consequence. The world cannot abide a void without adjusting itself. Trade routes shifted, for no merchant dared pass too close to the mountain. Kingdoms recalculated their strengths, uneasy at the thought of what Smaug might do if he stirred again. And in far-off places, whispers of opportunity began. For though the dragon seemed immovable, though his reign of silence appeared unchallenged, the hoard he guarded did not cease to call to hearts. Gold beneath dragon fire becomes a story that travels, and stories sow desire. Even as Smaug lay in stillness, His treasure was awakening ambition in those who had never seen it. The curse of dragon gold is subtle but profound. It is not simply that the wealth is vast, though vast it was beyond counting. It is that treasure once touched by dragon dominion ceases to be neutral. It becomes charged, steeped in fear and hunger, so that those who think of it cannot do so without coveting it. Smaug, in his very act of resting upon the hoard, transformed it into something more dangerous than gold alone, a lure, a beacon to greed, and a trap for all who dreamed of seizing it. Thus his dominion extended beyond the mountain walls, seeding conflict in the hearts of men and dwarves alike. Yet for Smaug, this was triumph. He did not need to stir to exert power. His sleep was his reign. His slumber was his weapon. To know he was there, vast and unchallenged, was enough to keep armies from gathering and kingdoms from daring. He was less a ruler than a weight upon the world, an immovable fact that shaped the lives of all who dwelt near. This was the essence of dragon kingship, sovereignty by annihilation, by absence, by the reminder that fire waits in silence. Still, silence cannot last forever. Smaug's presence, heavy though it was, began to ripple outward into consequence. The dwarves in exile remembered not only their loss, but their claim. The men of Lake Town, poor and anxious, whispered of the wealth that lay so close yet untouchable, and in the councils of the wise, the thought of a dragon bound to Sauron's will troubled more than one mind. The void Smaug had created was not stable. It was a wound, and wounds demand reckoning. In time the world would rise again to test the silence of Erebor. But for now Smaug reigned, coiled upon his bed of gold, his eyes shut, his breath slow, his thoughts locked in a satisfaction darker than sleep. He had undone a kingdom, remade a land, and enthroned himself without allies or subjects. His kingdom was ash, his crown was fire, his dominion was silence, and beyond the mountain, though life continued, every man, woman, and dwarf lived in quiet acknowledgement of what he had become, the last and greatest dragon, sovereign of absence, lord of a mountain that no longer belonged to the living. Thus the years stretched, measured not by the beating of hammers, but by the weight of fear. Yet even fear is not eternal, and in the minds of the dispossessed and the daring, thoughts began to turn. The hoard still called, the Arkenstone still gleamed, and one day the silence of Smaug would be answered. Beneath the shadow of the mountain, where once the bells of Dale had rung in festival and its markets had overflowed with color, there lay only silence and ruin. The proud city that had thrived at Erebor's feet was broken in Smaug's descent. Its houses burned, its streets blackened, its people scattered to the winds. From the ashes of Dale, survivors turned eastward, clinging to the narrow safety offered by the waters of the Long Lake. There they built Lake Town, or Esgaroth as it was called, a city of timber and piers, half floating upon the lake itself, half anchored to its shores. It was a settlement of necessity, fragile against the elements, yet bound together by the desperation of men who had lost their home. Life in Lake Town was hard, for fear is no true foundation. The people lived with eyes turned always to the mountain, its dark silhouette rising on the horizon, a reminder of what had been taken and what could at any time descend again. Every ripple on the water seemed a whisper of wings. Every gust of wind that carried the scent of smoke stirred old memories of fire, and though Smaug remained largely within his lair, the threat of his presence shaped the rhythm of every day. Men spoke in hushed tones of the dragon's wrath, careful not to tempt fate with boastful words. Children were taught early to respect the silence, to remember that their lives balanced on the whim of a creature whose fire had already consumed their kin. The economy of Lake Town was built less upon prosperity than endurance. Fishing boats filled the lake, their nets drawing up silver shoals that fed the city and offered trade with distant lands. Timber floated in rafts down the river running, sent southward to barter for grain and cloth. What once had been wealth flowing from Erebor's forges was replaced with survival sustained by water's bounty. Yet even this survival was precarious, for every merchant who entered Lake Town carried not only goods but rumors, and always those rumors bent toward the mountain. Did Smaug stir? Had he been seen in flight? Was there truth in whispers that his treasure might be won? Such questions haunted the markets as surely as the smoke of cooking fires. Fear shaped culture as much as hunger did. The people of Lake Town became cautious, wary of ambition, for ambition had led their forefathers into ruin. They honored the memory of Dale with quiet rituals, yet their songs carried less of hope and more of endurance. Festivals were muted, prayers cautious. Even laughter, when it came, felt fragile, as though too much joy might draw the dragon's gaze. The architecture of the town itself reflected this wariness. Homes built upon stilts, easy to abandon, easy to rebuild. No walls of stone, no grand halls, only structures that could be left behind if fire should return. It was a culture of impermanence, born of the knowledge that permanence had once been shattered. Yet beneath fear there flickered a spark that never wholly died, for the memory of Dale's prosperity remained, carried in the stories of elders and in the restless dreams of youth. Men spoke, sometimes in secret, of the treasures within Erebor, of the Arkenstone that still gleamed, of the hoard vast beyond counting. These whispers were both poison and promise. They fed envy and longing, for who could live in poverty while gold lay so close? But they also sustained the idea, however faint, that the world might yet be reclaimed, that one day perhaps the dragon would fall, and men would return to Dale not as beggars but as heirs. Still the shadow pressed down. Even when trade prospered, even when fish were plentiful, the fear of Smaug was never far. Fishermen on the lake often glanced to the skies, for tales told that dragons could sense gold or life across leagues, and no one dared believe he slept forever. Travelers who came through Lake Town carried with them the unease of outsiders, their voices quick to spread rumor. Some claimed to have seen light flickering at night upon the mountain slopes, as though fire breathed through cracks in the stone. Others said Smaug had flown further than the dwarves knew, seeking out herds in distant valleys. Truth was never certain, but in Lake Town rumor was as powerful as fact, for both carried the weight of dread. The leaders of Lake Town, too, were bound by this fear. The master governed less with courage than with caution, ensuring tribute and trade were maintained, but never daring to contemplate open defiance. He spoke often of prosperity, of survival, yet his words always skirted around the true power that held them captive. For all his authority, he too looked to the mountain with unease, knowing that no man's command could shield them from fire should Smaug rise again. Leadership in Lake Town was as much about maintaining calm in the face of dread as it was about guiding trade or law. Children grew beneath this atmosphere, never having seen Dale's glory but always aware of its shadow. Their games mimicked the past, with mock battles against imagined dragons. Yet even in play the fear was present. Songs sung by mothers carried warnings, not of ordinary dangers, but of wings that could descend without warning. The lake itself became their refuge, for the waters had spared them before, and so they trusted in its embrace more than in stone or steel. Yet hope is a stubborn thing. Though diminished, it lingered. A few believed in omens, in old prophecies that whispered that dragons, however mighty, were not eternal. Some believed that fate had not abandoned them, that one day a hero would rise to challenge the beast. These hopes were fragile, often spoken with half shame, as though to hope itself was dangerous. But they endured, carried quietly from one generation to the next. In this way, life continued under the shadow of Smaug. Lake Town endured, poised between despair and longing, never free of fear, never wholly without hope. The people lived with the constant knowledge that their fate was bound to the dragon above them, that every dawn was a borrowed gift, every night a reprieve. Yet even as they bowed beneath this weight, they whispered of treasure, of reclamation, of return. And in those whispers, faint though they were, lay the seeds of what was to come. For Smaug, though silent, was not forgotten. His presence was the defining fact of their existence, the shape around which their world was built. And while they endured in his shadow, others beyond the lake began to remember as well. The dragon's silence, heavy though it was, had not erased desire, it had only deepened it. And the wealth of Erebor, gleaming beneath fire, would one day summon more than whispers. It would summon those bold enough or desperate enough to test the silence of the mountain itself. Gold under dragon fire is not the same as gold forged in the hand of a craftsman. It changes, though not in its shape or weight, but in its very presence. Those who spoke of the treasure within Erebor after Smaug's coming did not describe it as wealth alone, but as something altered, something that clung to the imagination like smoke to the lungs. For dragon greed is no mere appetite. It is enchantment, subtle yet irresistible, a spell that binds treasure to desire, and desire to ruin. To lie upon such a hoard, to breathe upon it, to make it the bed of one's sleep, is to turn it into a thing that possesses as much as it is possessed. Smaug himself was both guardian and curse of the treasure. Every coin pressed against his belly, every gem caught in the folds of his scales, became part of him. He delighted not simply in its radiance, but in the knowledge that the treasure was denied to all others. His laughter when he stirred in his cavern was not the laughter of joy but of mockery, for he knew that outside the mountain the whispers of his hoard had already taken root. Men spoke of it in taverns, dwarves in exile remembered it with bitter longing, and even elves measured it in the quiet of their halls. The treasure had ceased to be Erebor's. It had become legend, and in that legend it drew hearts toward it, like moths toward flame. The Arkenstone gleamed brightest among all. The dwarves had once lifted it high as the heart of the mountain, a jewel to crown their lineage. In Smaug's dominion it was only another spark in the bed of his glory. Yet its radiance carried outward. Those who dreamed of Erebor never failed to speak of it, the stone that burned with inner fire, the prize of prizes. More than gold, more than silver, it became the symbol of what had been lost and of what might still be reclaimed. And as symbol it grew beyond its size, inspiring ambition in hearts that would otherwise have remained content. This enchantment of dragon gold does not work swiftly. It seeps, slow and quiet, into memory and into story. Those who pass along tales of the hoard may laugh at themselves, yet even in jest they plant the thought that such treasure could be theirs. Soon envy follows, and envy bends into greed. It does not matter if the hoard is unreachable, if Smaug lies upon it still. The thought itself is poison, and once ingested, it lingers. In distant lands, merchants argued over whether the treasure might one day be won. In dwarven halls far scattered, exiles dreamed of return. In Lake Town, where poverty and fear walked side by side, the thought of the hoard was both torment and promise. The dragon's greatest weapon, it seemed, was not only fire, but the curse that gold under his keeping carried into the minds of the living. The treasure's curse was not abstract. History had shown again and again that dragon hoards bred strife long after their guardians was slain. Men remembered tales of kingdoms ruined when dragon gold was divided, of blood spilt over single gems, of alliances shattered for crowns once melted in fire. Smaug's hoard was greater than any before it, and thus its curse would be greater still. Though none yet dared approach him, the seeds of contention were already being sown. Who, if he fell, would lay rightful claim? The dwarves whose craft had birthed the treasures, the men of Dale, whose city had perished in his wrath, the elves of the woodland realm, who had traded long with Erebor and lost much in its fall, or others drawn by rumor alone, seeking only gold without legacy. Such questions stirred faintly, yet their answers would one day blaze as fiercely as dragon fire itself. Smaug, in his cunning, understood this. He knew that to lie upon such a hoard was to make it more than treasure. It became a weapon that extended his reach without wings. He had no need to raid villages once the hoard's curse did his work for him, spreading envy, sowing discord, turning even distant folk against one another in thought. His silence was deceptive. While he seemed at rest, his treasure was already at war with the world beyond his gates. Every coin, every gem, was like a whisper sent outward, promising glory and wealth, yet carrying ruin within its promise. For the dwarves in exile, the treasure became a wound that could not heal. They sang of it, they dreamed of it, they spoke of the Arkenstone as though it still belonged to them, though they had not laid eyes upon it in decades. Their longing, though noble in its memory, was sharpened by the curse of dragon gold. It was no longer only the memory of home they yearned for, but the wealth and power that treasure represented. Even as they wandered hungry and dispossessed, the vision of their hoard burned brighter than the harsh reality of exile. In this way, Smaug's dominion reached beyond stone walls, chaining his enemies with their own desire. The men of Lake Town, too, felt its pull. Though they lived in poverty, fishing the lake and bartering timber, their eyes often turned to the mountain. They whispered of the riches buried beneath it, of what might be theirs if the dragon should ever fall. Their need made the thought sharper, their poverty deepening the poison. A fisherman pulling in a meager catch might glance toward Erebor and wonder how long it would be before someone tried. A trader carrying grain might count the coins in his pouch and think of the heaps lying untouched beneath Smaug's belly. Such thoughts, once begun, rarely leave a people, for hunger coupled with greed is a fire difficult quench. And so the hoard grew in power, not because its size increased, but because its story spread. Every day that Smaug lived, the legend of his treasure became more vast, more impossible, more irresistible. It was no longer just a collection of jewels and coins. It was destiny, a question placed upon the world. Who would dare? Who would claim? Who would pay the price? The curse was patient. It did not need to rush. It knew that sooner or later, someone would come. And when they did, the gold would do as it always had: divide, corrupt, consume. Thus, Smaug ruled not only with flame, but with silence, and not only with silence, but with treasure. The weight of his hoard pressed outward like unseen fire, shaping the thoughts of those who had never even glimpsed it. The Arkenstone burned in song, gold gleamed in rumor, silver shone in envy. And though Smaug lay still within his lair, the world beyond was already restless, already shifting, already being drawn toward the mountain by the irresistible pull of dragon gold. What had once been wealth was now curse, what had once been crown was now bait, and what had once been home was now a wound spreading outward in the minds of men, dwarves, and elves alike. In this way, Smaug's dominion was complete, not only over Erebor, but over imagination itself, and imagination, once ensnared, would lead inevitably toward action. The horde was waiting, and the world was listening. The dwarves who had once filled the halls of Erebor became wanderers, scattered across the wide lands of Middle-earth, carrying with them not gold or jewels, but the heavy burden of memory. Exile is not only the loss of home, but the slow erosion of certainty. the knowledge that what was once secure has been torn away and may never be restored. For Durin's folk, the fall of Erebor was not merely a defeat, it was a fracture in identity. They had been kings under mountains, makers of marvels, keepers of treasures. Now they were strangers on roads, laborers in foreign towns, mercenaries in distant wars. They bore their name with pride, but their pride was heavy, for it had no place to rest. Among them grew Thorin Oakenshield, grandson of Thror, who had once sat upon the throne beneath the mountain. He had been young when Smaug came, old enough to remember the fire, but not yet grown enough to defend his people. The memory of that flight, the sound of wings and the roar of flame, never left him. He carried it like a brand upon his spirit, a wound that bled into every choice he would make. In exile, he became both proud and restless, determined that his line would not end as beggars wandering roads. He worked where he could, fought when he must, but in his heart he carried one oath, that the mountain would be reclaimed and Smaug cast down from his hoard. Yet oaths alone cannot feed the hungry, and the years of wandering were harsh. The dwarves traveled far and wide, often in small bands, their beards worn thin by hardship, their hands once skilled in craft, turned to whatever labor was offered. Some worked in the forges of other kingdoms, their talents valued but their dignity unacknowledged. Others served as warriors for hire, their axes bought by coin rather than guided by kinship. Always they were outsiders, known by the shadow of their loss. The songs they sang around campfires were no longer only of Durin's glory, but of Durin's sorrow. And yet those songs, mournful though they were, kept the flame alive. For even in grief, the memory of what had been continued to bind them. Thror himself, once proud king, wandered with his people, carrying the Arkenstone's absence as if it were a weight upon his very chest. Pride undimmed by ruin, he still declared himself king under the mountain, though his mountain was lost. This pride, noble yet dangerous, drove him at last to madness, and he returned alone to the gates of Moria, seeking to reclaim another ancient home of his people. There he was slain, and his body desecrated by Azog the Defiler, an orc lord whose cruelty became legend. This act lit the fire of vengeance among the dwarves, and so began the war between them and the orcs that raged through the mountains and beneath the earth. It was in that war that Thorin earned the name Oakenshield. At the Battle of Ainulindalë, when the shield he bore was shattered, he seized a great oak branch from the ground and wielded it in defiance, rallying his kin and striking down foes with fury. The branch became his symbol, a mark of resilience, and the name clung to him ever after. Though the dwarves gained vengeance in that war, they gained no home. Moria remained in darkness, Erebor remained in silence, and exile endured. The victory was ash in their mouths, for their people were scattered still, and their treasures lay beneath the belly of Smaug. The younger generations grew up beneath this weight, inheriting exile as their birthright. They were taught of the mountain not as a place to which they belonged, but as a dream to which they might one day return. Around campfires and in cold stone shelters, fathers told sons of the glittering halls, of the Arkenstone's glow, of the forges that ran like rivers of fire. These stories became more than memory. They became identity itself, a promise of what should have been and what might yet be. In this way, the mountain lived on in words even as its gates remained closed. Yet exile shapes hearts as much as home does. Some among the dwarves grew weary, content to settle in distant lands, to make new lives apart from the memory of Erebor. Others clung more fiercely to the dream, their longing sharpened into bitterness against the world that had stood by while Smaug claimed their inheritance. For in their eyes no aid had come, no ally had stood beside them. They had lost not only home but trust. Thus the dwarves in exile became wary, self-reliant, their pride guarded by suspicion. They would work for others, but they would not bow. They would trade, but they would not beg. And always, deep in their hearts, they carried the oath of return. Thorin's resolve grew in these years. He became a leader not only by blood, but by endurance. His will hardened by hardship, his pride unbroken by wandering. Yet even his strength could not change the truth. Without army, without fortune, without allies, the mountain remained beyond reach. His people followed him, but their numbers were few, and their strength diminished. The dream endured, but it waited for a moment, a chance, something that might shift the balance. Until then, exile remained their fate. The memory of Smaug haunted them. In every tavern where they rested, they heard the whispers of the dragon's horde. In every land they passed through, men and elves alike spoke of the treasure beneath the mountain. It was as though Smaug's presence pursued them, not with fire but with rumor, a shadow that never lifted. They hated him, feared him, envied him, for he lay upon the wealth that had once been theirs, while they slept on cold ground and ate from borrowed tables. The curse of dragon gold pressed on them as surely as it pressed upon men of Lake Town. For the dwarves, however, it was sharper, for the treasure was not only legend but inheritance, bound to their very name. Thus the years stretched long. The mountain loomed always in their songs, the dragon always in their silence. The exile of Durin's folk was both wound and weapon, for though it humbled them, it also bound them together in purpose. They might wander roads, fight battles for strangers, toil in forges not their own, but within each heart the mountain still burned, and Thorin Oakenshield, carrying the memory of fire and the oath of return, became the living embodiment of that dream. Exile is not stasis. It is the gathering of longing, the sharpening of memory into resolve, and in the long silence of Smaug's dominion, the dwarves of Durin's line did not vanish. They endured, they carried their mountain within them, waiting for the day when fate would open a path back to the gates of Erebor. And though that path was yet hidden, though the dragon slept upon their treasure, the oath of return was alive. In the exile of the dwarves, the story of the mountain was not ended. It was only waiting, patient as stone for the hour when silence would break. Far from the waters of the long lake and the wandering paths of Durin's folk, another mind had long been considering the weight of Smaug's dominion. Gandalf the Grey, wise among the Istari, had watched the rise and fall of kingdoms for many ages, and he measured events not only in years but in the slow turning of fate. He had seen Erebor burn, seen Dale fall, and though others regarded these losses as tragic yet contained, he perceived something more dangerous, for Smaug was not simply a terror confined to the north. He was a piece upon a larger board, one that could be moved if dark hands sought to use him. And in the gathering shadows of the age, there was one who might seek exactly that. Sauron had stirred again in secret, not yet in open war, but already weaving his webs of influence. In the south, whispers spoke of his growing power in Dol Guldur, cloaked though it was in guise. Gandalf, through quiet journeys and secret watchings, had learned enough to be troubled. He understood that Sauron's strength lay not only in armies of orcs, but in corruption and cunning. A dragon, mighty and cruel, could serve him well. If Smaug were ever roused to join Sauron's cause, the north would fall in fire, and even the realms beyond would tremble. Thus the question of Smaug was not merely the concern of dwarves in exile or of men dwelling in fear by the lake. It was a matter of the balance of Middle-earth itself. Gandalf pondered long on this. He knew that dragons could not be swayed by ordinary men, nor tamed by treaties. Their allegiance, when given, was born of cunning bargains, or of shared malice. Smaug, proud and fierce, would not bow easily. Yet the thought of him allying with the Dark Lord was a threat that could not be ignored. To leave him unchallenged was to risk a peril greater than the ruin of Dale. It was to risk fire falling upon all free peoples, should the shadow grow bold enough to call him forth. And yet, what could be done? To storm Erebor was madness. To raise an army against Smaug was folly, for no host of men or dwarves could hope to endure his flame in the narrow halls of the mountain. Even if they gathered their strength, the cost would be too great, and the treasure would remain a curse upon the victors. Gandalf sought not merely to slay a dragon, but to remove him as a piece from the greater game, to shift the balance of fate before the Dark Lord could seize it. That required not brute force, but cunning, something that might unsettle Smaug in ways he could not anticipate. The dwarves in exile were part of this consideration. Gandalf had long walked among them, listening to their laments, hearing Thorin Oakenshield speak of oaths and return. He recognized the fire that burned in Thorin's heart, a fire born not only of pride but of grief sharpened into purpose. Here, perhaps, lay a chance. For the quest of the dwarves, if given direction, might serve more than their own longing. It might remove Smaug from the board altogether. Gandalf did not yet know the shape of this plan, but already he sensed that Thorin's dream of reclaiming Erebor could serve a greater design. Yet Thorin alone was not enough. Pride and anger are poor shields against dragonfire. To reclaim the mountain would require more than warriors. It would require stealth, wit, and the unexpected. And so Gandalf's thoughts turned toward an idea that others would call folly, the choosing of a burglar, a figure small enough to move unseen, humble enough to be underestimated, yet with courage hidden beneath an ordinary life. In such a one lay the key to entering Smaug's lair, to uncovering what armies could not. This thought was not formed in haste. Gandalf weighed it against the tides of history, against the nature of dragons and the weaknesses they sometimes betrayed. Smaug was vast, cunning and cruel, but he was also proud. Pride blinds even the mighty, and Gandalf understood that if any vulnerability were to be found, it would be by words and eyes rather than by blades. A burglar, then, would be not a thief alone, but a seeker of knowledge, one who might glimpse the chink in the armor that others could not. This was the design forming in Gandalf's mind, to set Thorin's company upon the road, guided not only by vengeance but by strategy, with one unexpected companion who might tip the balance. The risk was immense. To rouse Thorin with hope was to awaken dangers as well, for dwarves under oath and dream are not easily guided. To draw a hobbit into such a quest was to gamble with innocence. Yet Gandalf saw in this design the faint outline of possibility, and possibility is the seed from which great deeds grow. He knew that Smaug must be removed, not only for the sake of the dwarves, but for the sake of Middle-earth. The longer the dragon lay upon his hoard, the more inevitable it became that Shadow would reach out to him. Action, however uncertain, was better than silence. Thus, in quiet councils, Gandalf began to weave his part. He spoke with Thorin, testing his resolve, reminding him that exile need not be endless. He planted in him the thought that the time of reckoning drew near, that the world itself might be shifting toward an hour when the dragon could be faced. Thorin, proud and restless, grasped eagerly at such words, though he did not yet know the shape of the path ahead. Gandalf gave him no map, no promise, only the whisper that destiny had not forgotten. Durin's line, and so the design took root, fragile as it was. Gandalf carried within him the knowledge of greater perils, of shadows stirring in the east, of whispers gathering in the south. Against such darkness, even the fall of Smaug would be but one victory. Yet every piece removed from the board mattered, and this dragon lying upon his hoard was too dangerous a piece to leave unchallenged. In Thorin's longing and in the yet unmet hobbit's quiet courage, Gandalf saw the threads of a tale that might alter the fate of the age. Still, the mountain loomed, and the dragon slept. Smaug's breath rose in the caverns, hot and slow, his wings folded over treasure that glowed faintly in the dark. He knew nothing yet of plans stirring beyond his gates, of counsels whispered in distant lands. He lay content in his dominion, dreaming of fire and of gold, while outside the world shifted quietly toward him. Gandalf's design was not yet revealed, but the first steps had been taken, and the silence that had ruled since Smaug's coming was at last beginning to tremble with the approach of destiny. In the green hills of the Shire, far from the shadows of mountains and the whispers of dragonfire, there lived a people who prized peace above all else. Hobbits were a folk content with gardens, with meals taken at regular hours, with pipes smoked at dusk and ale poured at night. Their days were measured not by oaths or wars, but by the turning of seasons, the planting of seeds, the harvesting of crop. Among them dwelt Bilbo Baggins of Bag End, a hobbit who thought himself entirely ordinary, and perhaps he was, save for the small spark of something untested that lingered in him like an ember waiting for wind. He was no warrior, no craftsman of great renown, no king in exile, yet it was to him that fate would turn when the question of Smaug was pressed upon the world. Bilbo had not known exile or fire. His only battles were with weeds in his garden, and the insistent chatter of relatives at tea. Yet Gandalf the Grey, in his long pondering, had come to believe that it was precisely such ordinariness that might succeed where pride and ambition could not. Dragons expect kings and warriors. They expect swords raised and banners unfurled. They do not expect hobbits, and so Gandalf chose, not with certainty but with a kind of faith, to draw Bilbo into the path of destiny. When Thorin Oakenshield and his company of 12 arrived at Bag End, Bilbo found himself swept into a tale he had never sought. The dwarves spoke of their mountain, of gold piled high, of vengeance yet unfulfilled, and of Smaug coiled upon their birthright. Their voices were proud, their songs deep, their oaths unshaken. Bilbo listened with discomfort, for he had never seen a dragon, never dreamed of entering a mountain's depths, never thought of gold beyond the coins that bought his food and wine. Yet the song of the dwarves stirred something in him, something he did not name, a faint thrill that danced uneasily with his fear. Gandalf spoke plainly. The company needed a burglar, someone small and unexpected, someone who could slip unseen where warriors could not. Bilbo, bewildered, protested that he was no such figure. He knew nothing of locks or of stealth, nothing of dragon lairs or cursed treasure. Yet Gandalf saw in him a quality, hidden even from himself, courage untested, resilience cloaked in modesty, and the kind of simplicity that could withstand enchantment where others might fall. Dragons prey upon pride, but what could they make of a hobbit who prized food above jewels and a tidy home above crowns? The decision was not Bilbo's alone, nor was it made in haste. The dwarves doubted him, mocking gently his size and his comfort-loving ways. Thorin, proud and stern, questioned what value such a creature could bring to their cause. Yet Gandalf held firm, and Bilbo, torn between the safety of his hearth and the lure of adventure half unwillingly planted in him, found himself at last signing his name upon their contract. It was a small act, ink on parchment, yet it marked a turning point in the long silence of Smaug's reign, for with that signature, the path toward the mountain was begun. Bilbo's role was not only practical but symbolic. He was no heir to a throne, no wielder of ancient blades, no guardian of treasures lost. He was instead an outsider, one whose heart was not bound by the curse of dragon gold. In this lay his strength, though neither he nor the dwarves yet understood it. Where Thorin's desire burned with vengeance and pride, Bilbo's was dim, uncertain, and therefore less vulnerable to the dragon's spell. He would enter Smaug's lair not with the arrogance of a conqueror, but with the cautious curiosity of one who values survival above glory. This difference would matter. It would shape the encounter to come. The road that lay before him was long, and the Shire seemed to grow smaller with each step he took. Yet Bilbo's departure was itself a quiet rupture, a signal that the great design Gandalf had foreseen was beginning to unfold. The dwarves, hardened by exile, carried their grief and their pride. Bilbo, untested, carried his ordinary heart. Together they would journey toward a dragon who knew nothing of such companions, who could not imagine that his dominion might be undone by a hobbit's eyes and words. Still, doubts weighed heavily. Bilbo questioned himself often in those early days, wondering why he had agreed, wondering what possible use he could be against a foe vast as mountains. The dwarves, too, grumbled at times, unconvinced of Gandalf's wisdom. Yet the wizard's design was not born of chance. He knew that Bilbo's role was not to match Smaug in strength, but to uncover what others could not. The smallest creatures, he believed, can pass Antsen where the proud are noticed, can speak without being feared, can perceive what is hidden because they do not expect to see glory alone. And so the company pressed on, their songs echoing in night air, their thoughts bent upon the horde, their steps carrying them closer to the mountain. Bilbo walked among them, his heart caught between fear and a faint growing wonder. The world beyond the Shire unfolded before him, forests deep and shadowed, mountains sharp against the horizon, rivers that ran swift with ancient memory. Each step took him further from the life he had known, and nearer to the silence where Smaug lay dreaming. This choice of burglar was no small gamble. If Bilbo failed, the company would fall, and Smaug would remain upon his throne of gold. If he succeeded, the dragon might be unmasked, his secret laid bare, and the silence of the mountain broken at last. Everything rested on what this hobbit, this quiet figure from a distant green land, would see and say within the dragon's lair. Yet for now he walked uncertain, his courage unshaped, his role untested, carrying within him the hidden thread upon which the fate of Erebor would turn. In this way the story of the dragon began to entwine with the story of the hobbit. Two lives, distant in nature and in scale, were moving slowly toward one another, Smaug upon his horde vast and cruel, and Bilbo upon the road, small and hesitant. Neither knew yet how their meeting would shape the age, but the path was set, and the silence of the mountain would not endure forever. For a hobbit chosen as burglar was already on his way, and in that simple truth the fate of Smaug had begun to change. The long road of wandering and hardship, through wild forests and across desolate lands, brought Thorin's company at last to the foot of the mountain that had haunted their dreams. Erebor rose before them, no longer merely a memory or a distant outline upon the horizon, but a vast, brooding mass of stone, whose slopes were scarred by centuries of silence. The wind that circled its peak carried with it a faint bitterness, as though even the air remembered fire. For Bilbo Baggins, who had walked far beyond the borders of the Shire, the sight was overwhelming. Here stood the end of his journey, yet also its most perilous beginning. For within those gates, behind that carved arch of dwarven pride, lay the dragon. The approach to the mountain was not triumphant. Grass grew sparse upon the slopes. Blackened patches still marked the earth, where fire had once consumed whole forests, and the desolation of Smaug stretched wide. It was a land without bird-song, without life, haunted by the memory of terror. Even the dwarves, hardened by exile and longing, grew silent as they neared. The closer they came, the more the mountain seemed less a place of hope and more a tomb of pride, sealed by the weight of dragon breath. The great door, once the proud entrance of kings, was shut fast, its stone darkened with soot and age. No sound came from within, yet all knew that Smaug was there. The company sought a hidden way, a door long spoken of in half-remembered maps and whispered lore. They found it high upon the mountainside, narrow and secret, its stone fitted so cunningly that only those who knew might see it. Before that door, they waited, and it was Bilbo who felt the weight of expectation press most heavily. For he had been chosen not to fight, not to wield an axe or a sword, but to enter the lair of the dragon alone. He wondered, as he sat in the shadow of the wall, why fate had drawn him so far, why Gandalf had believed he could do what kings could not. His heart longed for the quiet lanes of Hobbiton, yet his feet had carried him here, and retreat was no longer possible. When at last the day came, Bilbo descended through the narrow passages into the belly of the mountain. The air grew hot and thick, and a glow began to pulse faintly upon the walls. He moved carefully, each step measured, his hand trembling as it touched the stone for guidance. The tunnel widened, and the glow became stronger, until suddenly he stood at the threshold of a cavern, vast beyond measure. What he saw there filled him with awe and dread so complete that for a moment he could neither move nor breathe. The treasure of Erebor lay before him, a sea of gold and silver, of jewels and crowns, of weapons and relics heaped without order into a mountain of wealth. It shone with its own light, reflections dancing upon the walls like restless flames. Yet this was no lifeless hoard. It breathed, for upon it, stretched vast as the hall itself, lay Smaug. His scales glistened like burnished copper and beaten gold, his wings folded like dark sails across his back, his tail curled in coils that reached from one end of the chamber to the other. The heat of his body filled the air, and his breathing was the slow rise and fall of a storm at rest. One great eye, lid closed, glimmered faintly with a red glow beneath, as though fire itself was imprisoned within. Bilbo's heart thudded painfully in his chest. The tales had spoken of dragons, but no tale could capture the immensity of the living presence before him. He knew that one careless sound, one clink of coin, would awaken a wrath beyond imagining. Yet he was there for a purpose, summoning courage from some deep place within. He crept further into the chamber, his small feet moving softly upon the shifting gold. He glanced upward, fearful, and saw how the hoard itself seemed to embrace the dragon, as though treasure and beast were one and the same. He moved among the piles, eyes wide, trying to take in the vastness of it all. Crowns lost for generations gleamed beside armor wrought in forgotten ages. Blades that had tasted ancient wars lay discarded beneath necklaces of pearl. In the center of it all, resting high above the other treasures, the Arkenstone glimmered faintly, as though its own light were imprisoned within the dragon's sleep. Bilbo felt its pull at once, a jewel that seemed more alive than any stone had the right to be. Yet he dared not linger upon it, for even as his gaze settled, Smaug stirred. The dragon's head shifted slightly, his lips curling as he breathed in. The sound was low, a rumble that trembled through the hoard, sending coins sliding in faint rivulets. Bilbo froze, every nerve in him alight with terror. Then the great head turned, and an eye opened, piercing and golden red, its slit pupil narrowing upon the intruder. The cavern blazed with its gaze, and Bilbo felt as though the fire of the world itself had fixed upon him. Smaug's voice broke the silence, deep and mocking, yet smooth as molten metal poured into a mold. "Well, thief, I smell you. I feel your air. I hear your breath. Come, do not skulk. Let me look upon you." Bilbo's knees trembled, yet he remembered Gandalf's counsel. Words were his shield. He bowed slightly, his voice unsteady but quick with wit. "I come not to steal, O Smaug the Tremendous, O Smaug the Golden. I come merely to look upon wonders spoken of in far lands." The dragon laughed, a sound like the shifting of avalanches. Coins tumbled as he stretched, his wings unfolding slightly, his chest rising as though the very hoard were part of his body. "Flatterer," he said, his eye narrowing with dangerous mirth. "You come for what is not yours, yet you speak boldly for one so small. Tell me, thief in the shadows, who sent you?" Bilbo's mind raced. He spoke carefully, cloaking truth in riddles, naming himself Ring-Winner and Luck-Bearer, never saying outright who his companions were. Smaug listened, amused, his laughter rolling like thunder in the deep. Yet beneath his pride, the dragon's cunning was sharp. He began to guess at Thorin's purpose, at the company's hope of reclaiming the mountain. His tail lashed, scattering jewels like sparks. So, Oakenshield would reclaim his birthright. Fool! No blade, no army, no hope can drive me from my bed of gold. Bilbo, desperate to turn the dragon's words to revelation, let his eyes wander over Smaug's vast body. And there, just beneath the foreleg, he saw it, a patch where the scales were missing, a small bare place upon the chest, where the red flesh gleamed. It was but a glimpse, yet enough. He masked his discovery behind riddles, speaking words that hinted but did not reveal, while in his heart he knew he had found what he had been sent to find. Smaug, proud yet suspicious, laughed again, but his gaze burned hotter. "You think me weak, you think me blind, yet I am fire, I am death. When I rise, the world shall tremble." His voice rose, echoing through the cavern, and Bilbo felt the weight of doom pressing down. He bowed low, then fled back up the passage, his breath ragged, his heart hammering, the sound of the dragon's laughter chasing him into the dark. Behind him, Smaug stirred fully at last, his wings unfurling, his rage ignited by suspicion and pride. The mountain shook with his movement, and the silence of years was broken by the thunder of a dragon awakened. Bilbo stumbled from the dark passage, breath ragged in his chest, the echo of Smaug's laughter still clinging to his ears like smoke. His companions gathered around him quickly, their faces anxious, their questions tumbling one over the other. Yet for a moment he could not speak. His hands trembled, his skin glistened with sweat, and his eyes held the reflection of something vast and terrible. Only after his breathing calmed did he recount what he had seen, and even then his words came with the weight of awe. He told of the treasure, piled high beyond imagining, of the dragon's voice rolling like thunder, of the terrible majesty of wings folded upon gold. The dwarves listened, their hearts swelling with both dread and longing, for the treasure was theirs by right, yet it lay beneath a foe no axe could cleave. But it was when Bilbo spoke of what he had discovered, almost by accident and almost by fate, that their hearts leapt with a different fire. He described the chink, the bare patch upon Smaug's breast, where the scales had fallen away, leaving the flesh exposed. It was not large, no wider than the space a hand might cover. Yet upon such small truths can destinies turn. A dragon armored in scales harder than mail, impervious to spear and arrow alike, might still be undone by the smallest weakness, if only the blow should find its mark. Bilbo's words were hushed, but they carried the weight of hope, and his companions, hardened by years of exile, clung to that hope like men grasping a rope above an abyss. Thorin's eyes burned as he listened, his pride stirred by the thought that the dragon was not invincible. "Then fate has not abandoned us," he said, his voice low yet fierce. "For even the greatest tyrant may bear a flaw, and even the proudest beast may be brought low. The day will come when that weakness shall be struck, and the mountain will be ours again." His words roused the dwarves, yet Bilbo, though he shared their hope, could not rid himself of the memory of Smaug's eye, vast and merciless, fixing him in its gaze. Hope and terror lived together in him, woven inseparably. Smaug, within his lair, had not been idle, though Bilbo had escaped with his life. The dragon's suspicion had been roused. He had smelled the air of strangers clinging to the hobbit, sensed the presence of others in his mountain. His pride was wounded by the thought that his dominion had been entered, his horde gazed upon by unworthy eyes. Rage swelled in him, mingled with the cruel amusement that always accompanied his cunning. He shifted upon the gold, his vast body stirring avalanches of coins, his wings unfurling slightly, their edges brushing the cavern walls. His laughter rolled again, though no ear but the mountains heard it, a laughter filled with menace. He spoke to himself, his voice reverberating across the stones. "Oakenshield, so the heir of Thror still lingers, nursing his broken pride, daring to send spies into my halls. Fool, does he think to reclaim what is mine? Does he dream that his kind might once more sit upon these thrones?" His eyes narrowed, glowing like furnaces in the dark. "Let him dream, for soon I shall show him the price of his folly. I am fire, I am death, and when I rise, the world shall remember." Smaug's thoughts turned toward the lake, toward the fragile settlement of men who had lingered too long in his shadow. He recalled their barges upon the waters, their laughter carried on winds that reached even his ears. They had prospered, meager though it was, under the illusion of safety, believing that his silence was mercy rather than indifference. Now suspicion burned in him, and pride demanded an answer. If intruders had come, if Thorin dared stir, then the men of Lake Town must have aided them. Who else could have sheltered wanderers so near the mountain? Who else could have carried whispers to his gate? His wrath sharpened into intent, and his vast body uncoiled from its slumber. Outside, upon the mountainside, Bilbo and the dwarves felt the tremors before they heard the roar. Stones shifted beneath their feet, the air grew hot, and then the mountain itself seemed to shudder as Smaug's wings beat for the first time in years. A sound like a storm breaking filled the valleys, and fire gleamed faintly in the night as the dragon rose into the open sky. The company crouched in fear, watching as a shape vast and terrible unfurled against the stars. Smaug had awakened, and his fury was loosed. Bilbo's heart sank, for though he had brought back knowledge of the dragon's flaw, he knew too that he had stirred the beast to wrath. He heard again Smaug's voice, echoing in his memory. "I am fire, I am death." The words rang like prophecy, and he feared what they might mean for those who dwelt in peace by the lake. The dwarves, though exultant at the knowledge of the chink in the dragon's armor, grew pale as they watched the fiery glow streak across the sky. They knew that the wrath of a dragon seldom falls upon its true target alone. Far below in Lake Town, the people stirred uneasily. A strange light rose upon the northern horizon, red and fierce, and the waters of the lake reflected it in trembling lines. Children woke in their beds, crying out at the glow. Men rushed to the quays, staring at the sky as the roar of wings carried across the night. A shadow fell upon the waters, vast and moving swiftly, and hearts that had long endured fear now beat with dread realized. For the dragon was coming, and his silence had ended. Thus the tale reached its turning. Bilbo had uncovered the secret, the bare patch upon the dragon's breast. Yet in doing so he had awakened a storm. Smaug's pride had been pierced, his fury unbound, and he would not rest until his wrath was spent. Knowledge had been won, but at a cost yet unseen. The chink in the armor was a hope for the future, but the fire rising in the sky was a peril for the present. As Bilbo and the dwarves huddled in the shadows of the mountain, watching the dragon's form vanish into the night, they knew that events had moved beyond their control. Smaug had chosen his course, and the world beyond the mountain would soon feel the weight of his vengeance. The night deepened over Lake Town, calm and still upon the waters, when the first great roar rolled down from the north. Men lifted their heads from hearth and bed, their faces pale in the glow of lanterns, and upon the horizon a fire rose, streaking the sky with crimson, as if the very heavens were aflame. The sound of wings followed, vast and thunderous, beating against the air like the fall of storms. Panic spread as voices cried out upon the Kuis, for all knew at once what it must mean. Smaug had come. The dragon descended swift and terrible, his vast shadow passing over the lake, his golden belly glowing like a furnace. Fire streamed from his jaws, trailing across the night like comets, and the waters hissed as sparks rained upon them. The wooden piers and houses of Lake Town, built upon stilts above the water, became kindling for his wrath. In an instant, roofs burst into flame, and the night was shattered by screams, by the crash of falling beams, by the roar of fire, as it leapt from house to house. The air filled with smoke, acrid and choking, and the people fled in boats and upon bridges, desperate to escape the wrath that had fallen upon them. Smaug laughed, a sound like iron tearing, cruel and triumphant. "So, little men of the lake, you shelter my enemies, you dare to dwell in my shadow. I am fire, I am death. Feel the ruin of your folly." His voice rolled over the waters, shaking the timbers of the town as though the words themselves bore weight. He swept low, his wings sending up great waves, his tail smashing through docks and barges. No wall could stand, no timber resist. The town that had endured in his shadow for generations was undone in minutes. Yet in that chaos, courage rose. Bard, a man of grim face and strong arm, stood upon the walls with bow in hand, rallying those who still fought to save their people. He shouted for the women and children to flee to the boats, his voice carrying above the din of fire. With others he loosed arrows, their shafts striking against the dragon's scales, yet falling harmless, clattering like sparks upon armor. Still they fired, not from hope but from defiance, for to stand idle was to perish without honor. Smaug's laughter only deepened as he felt their shafts break against him. Bard's heart was heavy, for he knew arrows could not pierce such a foe. Yet he did not despair entirely, for he carried with him one arrow unlike the others, a black shaft of old make, handed down through his family with words of fate attached to it. It was heavier, darker, stronger than common arrows, its tip wrought with skill long forgotten. He had kept it for years, unused, believing perhaps it was no more than relic and story. Yet now, as he watched the dragon wheel above the flames, he felt the weight of destiny pressing upon him. Still Smaug raged, circling over the burning town, exulting in the ruin he brought. He boasted of his might, proclaiming his invulnerability, mocking the futile arrows of men. He swept low again, and Bard's eyes, sharp in the firelight, caught sight of what Bilbo had seen. The bare patch beneath the dragon's breast, where scales were missing, where flesh gleamed red. His breath caught, for he knew that this was the only chance, the only mark worth striking. The fire leapt higher, the waters reflected the ruin, and the cries of the people filled the night. Bard drew forth the black arrow, set it upon the string, and whispered words of lineage and hope. "Arrow, black arrow, I have saved you to the last. You have never failed me, and always I have recovered you. If ever you brought me good fortune, speed me now." His arms bent the bow with all his strength, and he waited, calm amid the chaos, for the dragon to pass once more. Smaug came roaring down, his belly glowing, his chest exposed. He opened his jaws to pour fire upon the last of the houses, when Bard loosed. The arrow flew straight and true, its flight guided not only by skill, but by the weight of fate itself. It struck deep into the bare patch, piercing flesh where no scale protected, and in that instant the laughter of Smaug turned to a roar of agony. His body convulsed, fire pouring from his mouth in a final torrent that scorched the waters. He thrashed in the air, wings beating wildly, his tail lashing against the town in ruinous blows. But the wound was mortal. The black arrow had found its mark, and the great dragon, last of his kind, fell. He plunged downward, his body crashing upon the ruins of Lake Town, shattering houses, smashing piers, sending waves surging outward across the lake. Fire hissed into steam, smoke rose in pillars, and the earth shook with the weight of his fall. Smaug lay still, his golden form dimmed, his eyes darkened, his breath gone. The terror that had ruled the north for generations was ended in one shaft, loosed by one man. The people, though stricken by grief and ruin, beheld the fall with awe. Bard stood upon the quays, his bow still in hand, his face stern yet weary. The black arrow, his heirloom and his hope, had done its work but would return to him no more, for it lay buried within the heart of the dragon. Around him the survivors raised their voices, not in song but in cries of deliverance, for though their homes were lost, the shadow that had darkened their lives was gone. Yet the fall of Smaug was not only triumph. The town lay in ashes, its people homeless, their lives scattered upon the waters. And in the mountain to the north, the dragon's hoard now lay unguarded. The curse of dragon gold, spoken of in whispers, would now spread without restraint, for treasure without a master invites more ruin than treasure bound by fire. Already, even as the people wept upon the lake, word would carry to dwarves, to elves, to men of distant realms, that the dragon was dead and his treasure free for the taking. The night ended with smoke drifting over the water, with the body of Smaug lying broken amid the ruins, and with the people of Lake Town staring at both their salvation and their sorrow. A new chapter had opened in the fate of Middle-earth, for the dragon was gone. But his shadow lingered in the gold that gleamed within the mountain. The fire of his wrath had been quenched, but the fire of greed had only begun to burn. The dragon was dead. His fall had shaken the lake and broken the town. His golden carcass sprawled among the ruins, like a monument to both deliverance and devastation. For days afterward, smoke drifted over the water, mingling with steam rising where fire and lake had met. The people of Lake Town, though mourning their dead and shivering in the wreckage of their homes, could not speak of anything but the great moment when the black arrow had found its mark. Tales of Bard's courage spread swiftly, his name carried upon every tongue, though he himself stood apart, silent, his face marked not by triumph but by the weight of sorrow. For he saw not only the dragon's fall but the ruin it had brought upon his people, and he bore the knowledge that their survival now depended on rebuilding from ashes. Yet beyond the lake, the news spread even faster than the smoke. Messengers, travelers, and rumor itself carried word across the land. Smaug the Golden, last of the great fire drakes, had been slain. The hoard of Erebor lay unguarded. The curse of dragon gold, long sealed by the beast's presence, was loosed. The dwarves, still upon the mountainside, heard it with mingled awe and dread. Bilbo, weary and shaken from his encounter, felt both relief and foreboding. Relief for the dragon that had haunted his every thought since he first stepped into the dark had been destroyed. Foreboding, for he remembered the gleam in Thorin's eyes whenever treasure was spoken of, and he knew the mountain's wealth would draw more than dwarves. Thorin's heart blazed with a fire almost as fierce as Smaug's had been. "The mountain is ours," he declared, his voice echoing against the stone. "Our father's gold, our halls, our throne reclaimed at last. No dragon remains to defy us, the horde is free, and the Arkenstone shall shine again above the throne of Durin's line." His companions echoed his cry, their exile at last, seeming to draw to its end. Yet Bilbo, standing apart, watched the fire in Thorin's gaze, and felt a chill deeper than the night wind. For the mountain was not empty, it was filled with treasure steeped in curse, treasure that could bind even the proudest heart in chains unseen. News reached the woodland realm soon after. Elven ears were sharp, and the smoke rising in the distance was not missed. Word came to Thranduil, king beneath the forest, that Smaug was fallen. He remembered well the dealings of the dwarves and the wealth that had flowed from Erebor before the dragon's coming. Now that wealth lay unguarded, and his heart, though proud, was not untouched by the thought of what might be reclaimed. He gathered his host, not with haste, but with measured intent, for he knew others would be stirred as well. "The dragon is dead," he said to his captains. "The shadow over the north is broken, but gold unguarded will breed new shadow. We shall march to the mountain to see what justice and fortune may yet be ours." In the south, word also reached men of might, merchants and lords alike. Treasure, vast as kingdoms, lying open, could not be ignored. Some saw only gain, others saw peril, but all felt the pull. In Dale's ruins, long abandoned, whispers rose of return, for the city that had fallen to dragonfire might rise again if its wealth were restored. The river carried tidings as swiftly as boats, and each tale, however altered, drew more hearts into its snare. Thus Smaug's death, though it ended the terror of fire, loosed a new peril, the peril of greed and desire. The dwarves entered the mountain, stepping at last into the halls of their fathers. The silence was heavy, broken only by the clink of their boots upon scattered coins. Gold lay everywhere, piled in heaps so vast that the eye could not measure them all at once. Crowns, chalices, blades, and jewels glimmered in the dim light, casting strange reflections upon the walls. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and dragon, yet to the dwarves it was sweeter than spring, for it smelled of home reclaimed. They walked with reverent steps, touching pillars carved by their ancestors, whispering names long silent. Yet Thorin strode ahead, his eyes sweeping not the halls but the treasure, searching, always searching for the Arkenstone. Bilbo followed quietly, his small frame dwarfed by the towering chambers. His gaze lingered on the hoard, yet it was not with desire, but with unease. He remembered Smaug's shifting body upon that gold, how the treasure had seemed less a possession and more a living curse. The hobbit's heart, though simple, was steady, and he saw already how the gold pressed upon Thorin's spirit. The dwarves sang softly, voices rising in triumph, yet Bilbo heard a note of hunger threaded within, a strain of longing that troubled him. The dragon was gone, but the dragon's shadow lingered in the gold. Outside, in Lake Town, the survivors sought to rebuild. Their homes were lost, their stores of food and goods destroyed, yet their hearts clung to hope, for the dragon that had haunted them was no more, and though ruin surrounded them, they believed that fate had spared them for renewal. Bard, though unassuming, found himself called leader, his courage in the night of fire raising him above all others. He urged them to endurance, to seek aid from allies, to rebuild not only homes but lives. Yet he too knew that the treasure of the mountain loomed over all decisions. Without aid, the survivors could not endure the coming winter. Without gold, they could not rebuild, and gold now free would draw allies or enemies, depending on how it was claimed. So the word spread faster than armies could march, faster than ravens could fly. Smaug was dead. The mountain lay open. Its wealth was unguarded, and with that truth came a new danger, one not of fire but of pride and envy, of claim and counterclaim. The elves marched, the men of Lake Town looked northward, and Thorin, standing amid his father's halls, vowed never again to be dispossessed. Bilbo, watching him, wondered if the victory had already turned, for the dragon was slain, but the curse of dragon gold had been loosed into the world. What fire could not destroy, greed would now consume, unless wisdom tempered desire. Yet wisdom was seldom strong in the presence of gold, and the Arkenstone still shone unseen within the mountain, waiting to play its part in the fate that was unfolding. Thus the fall of Smaug, which had seemed an end, proved instead to be a beginning. The age of fire had closed, but an age of contention had opened, and the treasure that gleamed within Erebor would draw all the north into its shadow. Thorin dreamed of kingship, bard of rebuilding, Thranduil of his people's due, and others yet unnamed of their share. The dragon was gone, but his shadow remained, not in flame but in gold. And that shadow, though without wings, would spread across Middle-earth as surely as ever. Smaug had flown. The halls of Erebor echoed once more with the sound of voices, yet they were not the voices of joy. The dwarfs moved through the endless chambers with torches raised, their eyes glinting with wonder and hunger as the gold reflected upon them. Treasure piled higher than their heads surrounded them on every side. The legacy of their fathers now mingled with the plunder of Smaug's raids across Middle-earth. Each crown and jewel seemed to whisper, each blade hummed faintly as if remembering old battles. Yet above all this splendor lay an unseen weight, pressing upon the company with a silence as suffocating as the smoke that still lingered in the stone. For though the dragon was dead, his presence had not departed. The gold itself carried his shadow, and it was creeping into their hearts. Thorin Oakenshield stood tall among the piles, his eyes never resting, his steps swift and restless. He sought not merely gold, nor crowns, nor jewels. His mind, fevered by years of exile and sharpened by dreams, fixed upon one thing alone, the Arkenstone. He spoke of it often, his voice growing fierce as he described its brilliance, its rightful place above the throne of kings, its role as the heart of the mountain. The dwarves, weary but loyal, nodded, their trust in Thorin unshaken. Yet Bilbo, who walked quietly in their midst, felt unease coil within him. He had seen the gleam in Thorin's eyes, a gleam no different from the dragon's when it lay upon its hoard. The Arkenstone to Thorin was not merely a jewel, it was destiny itself, and destiny can burn like fire. As they explored further, they came upon the great halls where Smaug had once lain, the air still hot with the memory of his body. The hoard stretched vast, coins shifting underfoot like sand. The sound of each step rang strangely, as though the gold itself was alive, whispering of greed and possession. The dwarves began to murmur among themselves, not of the dragon, not of danger, but of what share might be theirs, of what treasures they might carry, of what thrones might be restored. Their voices, though hushed, carried the first notes of division. Bilbo heard them and shivered, for he knew that gold breeds quarrels even among the loyal, and here lay more gold than the world had ever seen gathered in one place. Outside, the news of Smaug's death was no longer rumor, but certainty. Ravens flew, their wings dark upon the pale sky, carrying tidings north and south. In the woodland realm, Thranduil's army marched beneath banners of green and silver, their steps measured, their faces calm but resolute. The Elven King knew well the curse of dragon gold, yet he also knew that such wealth could not be left unclaimed. He did not speak of greed, but of balance, of recompense for what had been lost when Smaug descended upon the lands. His soldiers moved in silence, a river of light beneath the trees, their path set toward the mountain. In Lake Town, ruins still smoldered, and the people shivered in the chill air. Bard walked among them, giving counsel, offering what little hope he could muster. He urged them to endure until aid might come, until homes might be rebuilt upon firmer ground. Yet his heart too turned toward Erebor, for he knew that without a share of its treasure, his people could not survive the winter. Their homes were ashes, their stores gone, their children hungry. The gold of the mountain, once a curse, now seemed the only salvation. Thus Bard, though wary, prepared to lead them northward, not with weapons alone, but with a claim rooted in survival. Therein, within the halls, grew more restless. He ordered the fortifying of gates, the barring of doors, the rebuilding of walls. Others will come, he warned, his voice heavy with suspicion. Men will come, elves will come. Vultures from every land will circle when they smell treasure. We must be ready. This hoard is ours. Our father's blood lies in these stones. Our exile has purchased this return, and no hand but ours shall lay claim. His companions, moved by loyalty, obeyed. Yet even among them, unease stirred, for they had not yet seen an enemy, and already Thorin spoke of siege. Bilbo watched in silence, his small hands fidgeting with the chain of his coat, his eyes thoughtful. He had seen Thorin grow proud, but now he saw something else as well. Fear. It was hidden beneath his anger, cloaked by his pride, yet it was there, gnawing at him. Fear that others would take what he had reclaimed, fear that the mountain would slip once more from his grasp, fear that without the Arkenstone, his kingship would be hollow. Bilbo pitied him, yet he also feared him, for fear, when wedded to pride, is a dangerous master. Nights passed in uneasy quiet. The dwarves took turns upon the walls, peering into the distance, listening for footsteps, expecting armies to appear at any moment. Bilbo, lying wakeful, thought often of the Arkenstone. He had glimpsed it once in Smaug's hall, glowing faintly like a star caught within the earth. Its beauty had pierced him, not with desire but with wonder, for it seemed less a jewel than a fragment of something eternal. He knew that if Thorin found it, his heart would be consumed utterly. And so the hobbit, torn between loyalty and dread, began to weigh choices he had never thought to make. Far away, in the lands beyond, the rumor of the horde spread like fire through dry grass. Men dreamed of crowns, elves of jewels, dwarves of lost relics. The dragon's death had unbound not only treasure but desire, and desire, though less sudden than flame, consumes as surely. Armies stirred, messengers rode, and the fate of Erebor drew all eyes northward. In the deep halls, Thorin's voice rang once more, commanding his companions to search tirelessly for the Arkenstone. "It is mine," he said, his voice low but burning. "It is the heart of this mountain, the proof of my right. Without it, I am but a pretender. With it, none shall question my rule." His companions bent to his command, though unease shadowed their eyes. Bilbo, hearing those words, felt the stone's weight upon his own heart, though it was not yet in his hand. He foresaw a storm greater than any dragon's fire, a storm of pride, of claim, of war. Thus the halls of Erebor, though freed from the beast, became no less perilous, for Smaug's death had opened not peace but strife, not harmony but contention. The dragon had fallen, but the shadow of his gold was rising, and the world was already moving toward the mountain, each step drawn by a promise as dangerous as fire. And within the mountain, Thorin Oakenshield, king under the mountain in name, was already consumed by the weight of a crown not yet upon his brow. The wind over the mountain carried the sound of wings no longer, for Smaug lay dead and silent upon the ruins of Lake Town. Yet new sounds rose in the distance, marching feet, the creak of wagons, The murmur of voices gathering, armies moved beneath the pale sky, drawn by the news that had spread like fire through the north. The dragon was no more, and the treasure of Erebor lay unguarded. Elves came from the greenwood, their ranks gleaming in green and silver, banners whispering against the cold air. Men led by bard marched with purpose, their faces stern though worn with grief, for their town lay in ashes and their children in need. Even the wild places stirred, as wanderers and fortune-seekers trailed behind greater hosts, hoping for a share of the plunder. The silence of Smaug's dominion had ended, and in its place rose the tumult of desire. Within the mountain, Thorin paced the great hall, his eyes restless, his voice sharp as he gave orders. The dwarves had barred the gates, fortified the entrances, and raised walls of stone and timber, though no enemy had yet reached their door. Thorin's thoughts were fixed, not upon the allies who approached, but upon foes imagined, upon claimants who, in his mind, circled like carrion birds. He spoke often of betrayal, of the need to guard what was theirs, of the treachery of men and elves. His companions listened in uneasy silence, bound by loyalty yet troubled by the change in his voice. For Thorin, once noble in exile, now sounded more like a king haunted by suspicion than a leader returned to triumph. Bilbo watched him with growing unease. He had never known the weight of gold to be so heavy, never seen how treasure could bend a heart as surely as chains. The dwarves had walked into the halls of their fathers with joy, yet joy had curdled into something harder, sharper. The hoard glimmered in their eyes, and Thorin's voice, once full of hope, grew harsher with each passing day. The hobbit felt himself shrinking in spirit, even as he moved quietly among them, carrying a secret that burdened him more than any jewel should. For hidden beneath his coat, wrapped carefully, lay the Arkenstone itself, which he had taken when first he wandered the hoard. He had not done it from greed, nor from malice, but from fear of what it might do to Thorin if he claimed it unchecked. Yet the weight of it pressed upon Bilbo's heart, for he knew that when the moment came, his choice would shape not only the fate of his friends, but the fate of the mountain. Outside the gates, the first of the armies drew near. Elves pitched their white tents upon the grass, their fires burning cold and steady, their songs rising like wind through leaves. Men, weary from their march, set camp beside them, their mood grim but resolute. They spoke of justice, of aid, of the debt owed by the mountain's wealth for the suffering Smaug had brought. Bard, though stern, spoke with measured words, urging his people to patience and his allies to restraint. He sought not war, but redress, not conquest, but survival. Yet he knew that Thorin, proud and unyielding, would not welcome such claims lightly. Ravens, wise and black-winged, flew between mountain and camp, bearing messages, their cries echoing against the cliffs. They had long been friends of Durin's folk, yet even they spoke in tones of caution. Others come, they told Thorin, elves with spears, men with bows, all drawn by the fall of the dragon. Speak wisely, son of Thrain, for many ears listen and many eyes hunger. But Thorin, hearing these tidings, clenched his fists and swore the mountain would not be yielded. Let them come, he said. We will answer their hunger with stone and steel. So began the long standoff. Armies camped at the mountain's feet, dwarves behind barred gates, suspicion thick in the air. Bilbo, moving between his companions, felt the weight of unease pressing heavier with each passing night. The treasure glittered, but the halls grew darker, the air colder. Songs once sung of triumph turned to mutterings of defense, of siege, of vengeance. The hobbit's heart longed for the Shire, for green hills and simple meals, yet he knew he could not leave. Fate had bound him here, to witness the unraveling of victory into conflict. In the camps below, Bard sought counsel with Thranduil. The Elven King's gaze was calm, his words smooth, yet his intent clear. The dragon's death has freed what was once bound. Shall it now fall to ruin again, consumed by quarrel? We must act, not only for ourselves, but for the balance of the North. Bard agreed, yet urged caution. He had seen Thorin's pride, and he knew that to demand outright would provoke war. Better to seek parley, to remind Thorin of the debt owed, to claim aid in the name of justice. And so envoys were sent, bearing words of peace mingled with demands. Thorin received them coldly. He stood tall in the gate, his armor gleaming, his eyes aflame with suspicion. "Tell your masters," he said, his voice ringing against the stone, "that Erebor is mine, won back by the blood of Durin's line. I owe no debt to elves or to men. Let them look to their own ruins, and I will look to my own crown." The envoys departed in silence, but their faces were grim, for they knew Thorin's pride would not bend, and already the talk in camp grew sharper. Bilbo, hearing these words, felt dread settle in him like ice. He saw the armies massing, saw the dwarves fortifying, and he knew that the dragon's death had not brought peace, but had instead lit the spark of another war. In his hand, hidden from all eyes, lay the Arkenstone, the one thing that might temper Thorin's pride or else inflame it to madness. Each night he turned it in his fingers, watching its light pulse like a captured star, wondering if he had the courage to use it, for he knew that soon a choice must be made, and that choice would bind the fates of men, elves and dwarves alike. Thus the mountain stood, proud and silent, its gates barred, its treasure glimmering in the dark. Around it, armies gathered, their fires burning in the night, their banners rising in the wind. The dragon was gone, yet his shadow lingered, not in flame but in gold, not in wings but in hearts. And in that shadow, the world moved toward a clash not of beasts, but of men and kings. A clash born not of survival but of desire. Bilbo, small and weary, stood at the heart of it, holding in secret the one jewel that might yet decide whether the mountain would be throne or tomb.